One question is now dominating the conversation surrounding the Nolan Wells investigation. Has the FBI quietly become involved in the Nolan Wells investigation? That's the question fueling intense discussion online. But what has actually been confirmed, and what is still speculation? Today we're separating fact from rumor as we examine the latest developments in one of Mississippi's most closely watched investigations. For weeks, this case has captured national attention as Nolan's family, supporters, and thousands following the investigation have searched for answers about what happened during the final hours before his death. Now, a new development is raising even more questions. Reports indicate that the Jackson County Sheriff's Office has reportedly been in contact with the FBI. That information has quickly spread across social media, leading many people to wonder if the federal government has officially taken over the investigation. But is that actually what happened? Or is there an important difference between the FBI providing assistance and the FBI leading a criminal investigation? In today's report, we're breaking down what has been publicly reported, what investigators have confirmed, and what still remains unknown. We'll also examine why local law enforcement agencies sometimes work with federal investigators, what legal experts say about this stage of the investigation, and why officials continue urging the public to wait for verified evidence rather than speculation. As always, our goal is to separate confirmed information from online rumors and provide fact-based coverage of this developing case. Before we continue, welcome to Brian Case Records, where we bring you carefully researched true crime investigations, breaking case updates, and in-depth analysis based on verified information. If you appreciate factual reporting without unnecessary speculation, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an important update. Now, let's take a closer look at what this reported FBI involvement could actually mean for the Nolan Wells investigation. As discussion around the Nolan Wells case continues to grow, one development has attracted widespread attention. Reports indicate that the Jackson County Sheriff's Office has reportedly been in contact with the FBI. That single detail has led many people to ask the same question. Has the FBI officially taken over the investigation? The answer is not that simple. According to publicly available reporting, there has been no official announcement that the FBI has assumed control of the Nolan Wells investigation or opened a separate federal criminal investigation. That distinction is important. In many criminal investigations across the United States, local and state agencies request assistance from federal authorities without giving up control of the case. The FBI has specialized resources that smaller law enforcement agencies may not always have available. Those resources can include advanced digital forensic analysis, technical support, evidence processing, and assistance coordinating investigations that extend across multiple jurisdictions. Receiving that kind of assistance does not automatically mean the investigation has become a federal case. Instead, it often reflects the growing complexity of the investigation itself. In the Nolan Wells case, investigators continue examining digital evidence, interviewing witnesses, reviewing timelines, and awaiting important forensic findings. Each of those steps requires time, and in some situations, additional expertise may be requested to ensure every piece of evidence is thoroughly examined. For many people following this case, however, the mention of the FBI immediately created new speculation online. Some believed federal investigators had already uncovered major new evidence. Others assumed arrests were now imminent. But as of now, none of those conclusions have been confirmed by investigators. That's why it's important to separate reported developments from assumptions. The reported contact with the FBI may simply reflect investigators using every available resource to move the case forward. Complex investigations often involve cooperation between multiple agencies, local law enforcement, state investigators, forensic specialists, medical examiners, and, in certain situations, federal agencies providing technical assistance. That kind of cooperation is not unusual, especially in cases receiving widespread public attention. It also doesn't mean the direction of the investigation has changed. Instead, it may indicate that investigators are carefully reviewing every available piece of evidence before making any major decisions. And right now, there is one area of the investigation that many believe could be especially important: the digital evidence. Questions surrounding Nolan's phone, electronic records, and communications have remained at the center of public discussion since the earliest days of the investigation. If investigators are receiving additional technical support, Many people are wondering whether that assistance could help answer some of the questions that have remained unresolved. But before reaching conclusions, it's important to understand why digital evidence has become such a significant part of this investigation. Because in today's world, a smartphone can reveal far more than just phone calls and text messages. It can help investigators reconstruct timelines, verify locations, compare witness accounts, and better understand a person's final movements. And that brings us to one of the most closely watched aspects of the Nolan Wells investigation: the questions surrounding his phone and why digital evidence may ultimately play a critical role in determining what happened next. As investigators continue piecing together Nolan Wells's final hours, one piece of evidence has remained at the center of public discussion from the very beginning: his phone. In almost every modern criminal investigation, a person's smartphone can become one of the most valuable sources of information available to investigators. It's more than a device used for calls and messages. It can contain location history, photos, videos, app activity, internet searches, and digital records that help establish a timeline of events. That's why investigators often move quickly to secure electronic devices and preserve their contents before any information can be altered or lost. In the Nolan Wells case, questions about the phone began almost immediately after he was reported missing. According to public statements made by Nolan's family, his mother used a phone tracking application in an effort to locate the device. The family has publicly stated that the phone's location eventually led them to the home of one of the young men who had reportedly been with Nolan before he disappeared. Those statements quickly became one of the most discussed aspects of the case, not because they established criminal responsibility, but because they raised questions that many people believed investigators would need to answer. According to the family, they also noticed what they described as unusual activity after recovering the phone. They have publicly claimed that certain text messages appeared to have been deleted. They also stated that Nolan showed no Snapchat activity that day, something they described as highly unusual based on his normal habits. It's important to emphasize that these are claims made publicly by the family. Law enforcement has not publicly confirmed what digital evidence has been recovered or what conclusions investigators have reached after examining Nolan's phone. That distinction matters. Public statements and official investigative findings are not always the same thing. Investigators will ultimately determine what evidence can be verified through forensic examination. And today's digital forensic tools are often capable of recovering information that appears to have been deleted. Specialists can sometimes retrieve deleted messages, recover location data, examine application activity, and reconstruct timelines using information stored both on the device and through cloud-based services. Whether that has happened in this investigation has not been publicly disclosed. But if digital forensic experts are involved, that process could become one of the most important parts of determining exactly what happened during Nolan's final hours. At the same time, digital evidence is only one piece of the puzzle. Phones can reveal where someone may have been. They can show when messages were sent. They can help establish timelines. But they cannot always explain why events unfolded the way they did. For that, investigators must compare digital evidence with witness interviews, surveillance footage, forensic findings, and every other piece of information collected throughout the investigation. And that brings us to another major development that has generated significant discussion: the final conversations Nolan had before he disappeared. Different accounts of those moments have raised new questions about the timeline. Were those accounts contradictory? Or could they simply describe different moments during a rapidly unfolding situation? Understanding those differing accounts may be one of the most important challenges investigators continue to face. As investigators continue reviewing evidence, one question remains at the heart of the Nolan Wells investigation: what happened in the moments before Nolan was last seen? Much of the public discussion has focused on the final interactions Nolan reportedly had while he was at the beach. According to public statements made by attorney Ben Crump, one account suggests that Nolan intended to return to the boat after speaking with a young woman he had met that afternoon. However, another account reportedly given by some of the friends who were with Nolan suggests something different. According to those reports, Nolan chose to remain behind while they left the area. Those two accounts have become one of the biggest points of discussion surrounding the investigation. If both versions describe the same moment, they appear difficult to reconcile. But investigators are trained to look beyond first impressions. In many investigations, witness accounts can differ for reasons that have nothing to do with dishonesty. People observe events from different locations. They remember conversations differently. They notice different details. And when an unexpected tragedy occurs, memories of ordinary moments can become much harder to reconstruct accurately. That's one reason investigators typically interview witnesses separately rather than together. Each person is asked to describe events independently. Investigators then compare those statements to determine where the accounts are consistent and where important differences begin to appear. Those comparisons can help establish a reliable timeline. They can also identify details that deserve closer examination. Recently, another important piece of information entered the public conversation. The young woman Nolan was reportedly speaking with has now been publicly identified by members of her family as Katie. According to public Facebook posts made by Katie's family, she believed Nolan was preparing to return to the boat after their conversation ended. Her family has also stated that Katie left the area on a different boat with other people and had no direct knowledge of what happened after she and Nolan parted ways. Those statements have drawn significant public attention. However, it's important to understand what they represent. At this time, Katie has not publicly given a formal interview about the case. The information available has come through statements made by members of her family. Those statements provide additional context, but they are not the same as sworn testimony or official investigative findings. That distinction is important. Investigators will ultimately determine how those statements fit alongside witness interviews, digital evidence, and other information collected during the investigation. It's also possible that the differing accounts are describing different moments during a rapidly changing situation. Someone may have intended to return to the boat. Plans may have changed. Or different people may simply remember events differently after the passage of time. Right now, investigators have not publicly explained which account, if any, is supported by the evidence they have gathered. And until they do, many of the questions surrounding Nolan's final movements remain unanswered. While these differing accounts continue to generate discussion, there is another critical piece of evidence that many believe could help clarify the investigation: the autopsy findings. Those results have been highly anticipated since the earliest days of the case and may provide investigators with important forensic information that could influence the direction of the investigation. While much of the public conversation has focused on witness accounts and the reported timeline of Nolan's final hours, investigators are also waiting for something that could prove even more important: the forensic evidence. In many criminal investigations, witness statements provide investigators with one version of events, but forensic evidence helps determine whether those accounts are supported by physical facts. That's why so much attention has been placed on the autopsy and toxicology reports in the Nolan Wells case. Since the beginning of the investigation, Nolan's family has sought an independent examination in addition to the autopsy being conducted through official channels. Both examinations are expected to provide valuable information that investigators can compare with witness statements, digital evidence, and other findings gathered throughout the investigation. At the time of this report, the complete results of those examinations have not been publicly released. That has led to growing speculation online. Some social media posts have claimed the reports are already complete. Others have suggested they contain information that investigators are keeping secret. However, none of those claims have been officially confirmed. In reality, forensic testing often takes much longer than many people expect. One reason is toxicology testing. Unlike routine examinations, toxicology often requires specialized laboratory analysis. Samples may be sent to outside laboratories where scientists carefully test for alcohol, medications, controlled substances, or other substances that could help explain what happened. That process is detailed, methodical, and can take days or even weeks before investigators receive the final results. Former law enforcement officials have noted that waiting several weeks for toxicology findings is not unusual, even in cases that receive very little public attention. Although the delay has been frustrating for Nolan's family and for those following the investigation, investigators generally avoid rushing forensic examinations. Accuracy is far more important than speed. A single laboratory finding has the potential to change the direction of an entire investigation. That's why officials rarely release partial results before every test has been completed and carefully reviewed. Unfortunately, the absence of official information has also created an environment where rumors can spread quickly. As public interest has grown, countless posts, videos, and online discussions have circulated claiming to reveal new evidence or inside information. Some of those claims have attracted significant attention, but attention does not make information accurate. Several established news organizations have warned that misinformation surrounding the Nolan Wells investigation has increased as people search for answers before official findings become available. For anyone following this case, that serves as an important reminder. Not everything shared online has been verified. In high-profile investigations, speculation often spreads much faster than confirmed facts. That is why investigators continue urging the public to rely on official statements and credible reporting rather than rumors circulating on social media. At Bryan Case Records, that's the approach we remain committed to. We'll continue bringing you updates based on publicly available information from credible sources, while making a clear distinction between verified facts, public statements, and unconfirmed claims. Because in a case as important as this one, accuracy matters. And while forensic evidence may answer some questions, it may also raise entirely new ones. Meanwhile, investigators continue another critical part of the process behind the scenes: interviewing witnesses, reviewing timelines, comparing independent accounts, and searching for any detail that could help explain exactly what happened during Nolan Wells' final hours. That investigative process may ultimately prove just as important as the forensic evidence itself. As the Nolan Wells investigation continues, one question remains at the center of nearly every discussion. How do investigators determine which version of events is the most accurate? The answer often begins with witness interviews. Contrary to what many people see in television dramas, investigators rarely rely on a single interview or one person's memory. Instead, they build a timeline by collecting independent accounts from everyone who may have seen or heard something relevant. That's why experienced investigators almost always interview witnesses separately. The goal isn't to accuse anyone of being dishonest. It's to give each person the opportunity to describe what they remember without being influenced by someone else's version of events. Even when people experience the exact same situation, they often remember different details. One person may remember a conversation. Another may remember who walked away first. Someone else may remember the exact time an event occurred. By comparing these individual accounts, investigators begin looking for patterns. They identify the details that remain consistent across multiple interviews. At the same time, they pay close attention to the places where those stories begin to differ. Those differences don't automatically mean someone is lying. In many cases, they simply reflect how human memory works. Stress, distractions, the passage of time, and even where someone was standing can all affect what they remember. That's why investigators don't stop with witness statements alone. They compare those statements with digital evidence, phone records, location data, photos, videos, surveillance footage, and forensic findings. Every piece of evidence is examined together to determine whether the timeline being described matches the physical evidence. Former law enforcement officials have explained that this process often takes much longer than the public expects. In a case receiving this much national attention, investigators know every decision they make will be carefully examined. That means interviews must be thorough, evidence must be verified, and conclusions must be supported by facts rather than assumptions. For Nolan's family, however, every passing day feels like another day without answers. For supporters following the case, the silence has been difficult to understand. But investigators often say that silence should not automatically be mistaken for inactivity. Much of the work happens behind closed doors. Witnesses continue to be interviewed. Evidence continues to be analyzed. Experts continue examining digital records and forensic findings. Although the public may not see those efforts, they often represent the most important stage of an investigation. Every new interview has the potential to clarify the timeline. Every new piece of evidence has the potential to answer a question or raise an entirely new one. And that is why investigators remain cautious about making public statements before the evidence has been fully reviewed. As the investigation moves forward, one development has continued attracting widespread public attention: the reported contact with the FBI. Many people believe that development could signal a significant turning point. But what does FBI assistance actually mean in a case like this? And how does cooperation between local and federal investigators typically work? One of the biggest developments discussed in recent days has been the reported involvement of the FBI. For many people following the Nolan Wells case, hearing the words FBI immediately raised expectations. Some assumed federal agents had taken over the investigation. Others believed arrests might be just around the corner. But criminal investigations are often more complex than that. According to publicly available reporting, there has been no official announcement that the FBI has assumed control of the Nolan Wells investigation. Instead, reports indicate that local investigators have reportedly been in contact with the agency. While that may sound like a dramatic development, it's important to understand that cooperation between local law enforcement and federal agencies happens more often than many people realize. The FBI has access to specialized resources that smaller departments may not always have. Those resources can include advanced digital forensic analysis, technical support, evidence recovery, and investigative expertise in complex cases. When local agencies request that kind of assistance, it doesn't necessarily mean they've lost confidence in their own investigation. In many cases, it simply means they're using every available resource to ensure that no important piece of evidence is overlooked. Cases involving electronic devices, large amounts of digital data, or multiple jurisdictions often require specialized technical support. That support may include recovering deleted files, analyzing location data, examining digital communications, or helping investigators organize large volumes of evidence. Whether any of those specific resources are being used in the Nolan Wells investigation has not been publicly confirmed. However, law enforcement experts say that requesting assistance from another agency is not unusual when a case becomes increasingly complex. It's also important to understand what FBI assistance does not automatically mean. It does not necessarily indicate that federal crimes have been identified. It does not automatically mean criminal charges are about to be filed. And it does not mean investigators have already reached conclusions about what happened. Instead, it may simply reflect an effort to strengthen the investigation by bringing in additional expertise. That distinction is important because speculation often moves much faster than official information. As news of the reported FBI contacts spread across social media, countless theories quickly followed. Some suggested the investigation had entered an entirely new phase. Others claimed major breakthroughs had already occurred. At this point, however, investigators have not publicly confirmed those claims. What has remained consistent throughout the investigation is the message from law enforcement. The investigation is active. Evidence continues to be reviewed. Witness interviews continue. Forensic testing continues. And investigators have asked the public to allow that process to unfold before drawing conclusions. For Nolan's family, every day without definitive answers is another difficult day. For the community, patience has become increasingly difficult. But experienced investigators often emphasize that building a case requires more than public pressure. It requires evidence that can withstand careful examination in court. That's why investigators continue moving methodically, reviewing every lead, every interview, and every piece of forensic evidence before making decisions that could shape the future of the case. And while many questions remain unanswered today, one thing is clear. The Nolan Wells investigation continues to receive significant public attention. Whether that attention ultimately leads to new evidence, additional witnesses, or future developments remains to be seen. But for now, investigators continue following the facts wherever they lead. As the Nolan Wells investigation continues, one thing has become increasingly clear. This case has grown far beyond a local news story. It has become a case followed by thousands of people across the country, with every new development closely examined by the public, the media, and those seeking answers for Nolan's family. The reported contact with the FBI has added another layer to an investigation that was already receiving national attention. But it's important to remember that assistance from another agency is not the same as a federal takeover, nor does it automatically signal that arrests are imminent. Investigations like this are built one step at a time. Witnesses are interviewed. Digital evidence is examined. Forensic testing is completed. Timelines are reconstructed. And every piece of evidence must be carefully evaluated before investigators can reach conclusions that will withstand legal scrutiny. That process can be frustratingly slow for families waiting for answers. It can also be difficult for the public, especially when very little official information is released. But experienced investigators often remind us that patience is an important part of any complex investigation. Rushing to conclusions without evidence helps no one. Throughout this case, many questions have been asked. What happened during Nolan's final hours? What does the digital evidence reveal? Will the autopsy provide new answers? What information have investigators uncovered that has not yet been made public? And now, another question has entered the conversation. What role, if any, will the FBI ultimately play as this investigation continues? At this stage, many of those questions remain unanswered. Until investigators release additional information, much of what circulates online will remain speculation rather than established fact. That's why it's more important than ever to rely on verified reporting, official statements, and evidence instead of rumors. Here at Brian Case Records, that's the commitment we've made to every case we cover. Our goal isn't to rush to judgment. It's to present the facts that are publicly available, explain the investigative process, and keep you informed as new developments emerge. As always, we'll continue monitoring the Nolan Wells investigation and bring you updates whenever credible new information is released. Now we'd like to hear from you. Do you think the reported FBI involvement is simply a routine step in a complex investigation, or could it signal that the case is entering a new phase? Share your thoughts in the comments below, but please remember to keep the discussion respectful and avoid making accusations that are not supported by evidence. If you found this report informative and want fact-based updates on the Nolan Wells investigation and other developing true crime cases, please subscribe to Brian Case Records, turn on notifications, and share this video with others who are following the case. Your support allows us to continue producing carefully researched, balanced, and factual coverage of the stories that matter most. Thank you for watching Brian Case Records.